Good morning, good evening, or happy time zone. I'm not sure where you are. My name is Long-Fang, and this will be the discussion of session number 1 for Ashes of History, my Dark Ages Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition game. If you have not yet watched that, there will be spoilers all over the place. So I would recommend you do that. It also might help give you context for what we're going to talk about. But in any case, warning aside, let's begin. We were introduced to our characters because this was session 1, and we have quite the motley crew, if I do say so myself. I guess we will start. I'm visualizing them as they sit around my table, so hold on while I do this. I would normally start with Seti, but you can't really talk about Seti without talking also about Curvis. So here's where we are. We'll just discuss that group in general. Curvis is a Malkavian merchant, prince want-to-be. He has this desire to be the power behind the throne, the person who controls pretty much economically as much as possible. His area of specialty is kind of like manipulating people. His child, Seti, is very young, only like a year old. And he was a Egyptian doctor. He was in the Great Library of Alexandria, studied there for a while. But yes, he's an organivore, but he also has visions, severe visions, which are great for any kind of storyteller to play with. So I will absolutely leverage that to the hilt. Also in that little grouping, you have Shadowfang, the gangrel, who is Curvis's bodyguard. He was a legionnaire, and he's kind of the voice of sanity for the group, as strange as that is. I suppose it's not necessarily strange, but it is a well-needed voice. Let us say that. Also associated with them is Aemilia. She's a Toreador artist, with ties to Rome. She came with Lillian, her art contact, to establish herself as an artist here, and seems to be doing a pretty good job to start. That being said, she also wasn't trained that much. Her sire was a bite and go kind of person, so doesn't have much in the way of knowing what's going on. So Aemilia was put into the educational charge of another one of the party members, Lucille. Lucille is a Ventru who is looking for a place to call their own, and established themselves out here as kind of a way of getting their own place. They're trying to make a name for themselves and get into the social scene, and it seems to be working because the party is well attended that will kick off the heart of today's action. There was another vampire that was placed in the care of Lucille, and that would be Nemain. Nemain is brand spanking new, as in she was embraced at the start of the session. Her being dragged in after being a week a vampire and discussing things with Justinian, who, being the oldest vampire in the city, is the de facto prince, and who everyone else is paying tribute to. But it is exciting. We also have Beatrice. Beatrice followed her siblings to Londinium and established herself there. They have a child, and basically their small family is running the weaver's shop here. And they are doing a booming business because they actually know what they're doing very well. But they are on the more humane side since they are a farmer. And that brings us to the last character in our motley crew, and that would be Donico, the Nosferatu. He's not the ugly kind, he's the vermin-ridden kind, so that's entertaining. He is a druid, and he lives out in the woods on the north side of London. He also is the one who is making a living by, hunting animals and then bringing in the corpses. So we do have this crew, 8 players all told, which, yes, I understand that is a lot of players, but it's not unmanageable. You just have to make sure that you continue to engage everyone. Keep moving around the table. And even though that is a ton of players, a ton of vampires for a population of 60,000, they've actually managed to keep it under control to a certain degree because of how they feed. Because we've got, yes, 9 vampires among 60,000. However, SETI is an organivore who feeds on the dead, not impacting the numbers. We've got Donako and Beatrix, who are feeding on animals, not impacting the numbers. Curvis feeds only on his family, only mildly impacting the numbers. We really have this situation where it's closer to 5 on 60,000, which is within tolerances, easily. It's still fairly precarious, and what passes for a veil is very thin out when you get near the frontiers anyway, so it's kind of a matter of perspective. But it's not going to be an issue anyway. Well, it's not an immediate issue, I suppose is the way it should be put, because they will have other issues to deal with. Starting after their introduction, we move into the heart of the story, the engaging incident, as it were. Lucille has thrown this lavish party for the who's who of society. And of course, being the polite and generous host that she is, she has invited all of the vampires of the city, who, aside from Beatrice, chose to attend. Beatrice said, no, I've got other things to do. So they were working. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't be involved in the action. It just means they wouldn't be involved in the immediate action. They would get caught up more in the aftermath. But players have their choices, and I respect that. You have to do what the character would do. So, in the party, everyone seems to be getting along for the most part. Except that SETI has had this vision. And it was disturbing enough to drive him to the party, even though he wasn't originally planning to go. So he goes to the party to report that there will be trouble, though it's always gauged in clouded prophecies and oracles. For example, in this one, he saw a woman with a face like thunder, the smell of cinnamon, and reached out and put pink ribbons everywhere. It was vague and threatening. That's what I'm shooting for. I'm shooting for just vague and threatening enough for people to react. Well, when the quote-unquote woman who with a face like thunder shows up, that is a tall, braided Celtic woman at the head of a warband who calls out Justinian. Of course, he's not interested. He tells her to come back in a century, which is an obvious insult. Things begin to escalate. Curvis does not help. Curvis is acting as quote-unquote translator, but while he's doing so, he's actively dementating this woman to strip away her willpower. Donako, on the other hand, thinks that something might be amiss and uses his powers to check in and discovers that 3 of these figures are lupines. And he starts backing towards a window because he has common sense. It was almost to the point of dissolving into violence. It did not dissolve, but it began to edge into violence. The woman stepped forward, she shifted into Krynos, and she was about to go through the Legionnaires like a hot knife through butter in order to get to Justinian, when Shadowfang stepped forward, and I made him make an intimidation check, but really what he was trying to do was be the voice of reason and influence her that there was a better place that wasn't surrounded by innocence. And she listened to that. So she made her threat. She said, I will take a tithe of your men if within 24 hours you do not turn yourself over. And I'll take this one with me. And she reached out and she grabbed a soldier, her claws piercing right through the lorica, dragged him up by his throat, and carried him out with her. Which, when they were heading for the edge of the city, Beatrice saw and absolutely locked down her house because she also has common sense. So there are people who know what they should be doing in this group. Meanwhile, Nemaine wasn't even at the party because she was upstairs trying to tell fortunes to suckers, which she found a handful of suckers, and one of them she even convinced to come back later for special services, which was her raising the dead, with not talk, but to engage with them. Needless to say, the party dissolved after that into chaos and screaming, and there was a lot of problems that they had to deal with in the aftermath. Poor Lucille had her reputation tarnished for having her party crashed, and the PCs would have to deal with the fact that there are Geru, lupines, out there who are going to start killing Roman soldiers unless they can convince Justinian to turn himself in, which they don't even know what he's been accused of or why they want him. I guess we'll have to see what they end up doing in session 2. I did want to discuss a few other things mechanically that I do for my games that I didn't get to in the pregame discussion, but are interesting, and they are relevant if you saw them in the first session. Well, one of them wouldn't have been seen, but yeah, they're relevant. The first would have been the fortune die. Now, if somebody asked me for something that is plausible but not certain, I could either make a decision on the fly, or I could leave it in the hands of fate. So, I think it adds a certain level of tension to leave it in the hands of fate, so I'll have them roll essentially a rouse check, but for luck. They'll roll a single die. If it's a success, what they want happens. If it's a failure, it doesn't. So it's kind of like check the trunk, I guess, but for fortune in general. The other mechanic is how I handle XP. Experience, I give out, I'd say not lavishly, but reasonably, on the high side of reasonably. My players get 1 experience point automatically for showing up to a session. They get a second for discussing things with me, like if for their downtime activities or how they're feeling about the sessions or their thoughts and stuff like that. They get a third one if they send me some kind of concrete, like Discord message or something like that, that has what they are doing for downtime, so that I have a record of it. So it is potentially possible for a player to earn up to 3 experience points in a single session. But a lot of that requires on them participating. It kind of draws them in, as it were, encourages interaction. So yes, that could edge into lavish, because 3 experience is enough to buy a brand new 1-dot skill, but it's not enough to buy a brand new dot of discipline. That would take at least a couple of sessions for them to do that. And even then, it would require them to be fully engaged. Most of my players don't get the full 3. Well, I wouldn't say most. I'd say probably half get the full 3. And then there's the extra ones. If a session is scheduled, but I can't make it, something comes up, because I hold my sessions every 2 weeks, like clockwork. If something comes up and I can't make the session, and we can't reschedule it, then I will give them 1 XP as if they had been there. They won't get any downtime, but they will get 1 XP as a kind of, that's my bad. If they don't show up to a session, they don't get anything. So they don't get the XP for downtime, they don't get the XP for showing up. They don't get anything on that one. When I have a time jump, so when I finish an arc, like in a few sessions, I will finish this arc, because that was my plan, to have things run for 3 to 5 sessions in a particular time, and then move on. I will give them 1 XP for finishing the arc, and depending on how long the time jump is, I will give them additional XP. to represent what they were doing in that time. It's not a ton of XP. It's like, if it's 10 years or less, that'll give them one, probably around that age. So if it's like just 10 years or less, about a decade will get you one, or a fraction of one. It's just a token to say, hey, you were progressing, something was happening. If it was a particularly turbulent period of time, I might give them as much as 2. If we're going for a long time, we'll see how much I give them. I'm not planning on it being a huge amount of time. The other thing that I am planning on doing is allowing for shifts. So, for example, you can shift during the end of arc downtime, like the time jump between one period and next. I'm going to allow them to shift dots. Not a lot. They can shift 1 dot for an equivalent dot. So if they had a 2 in one skill and a 1 in another skill, they could shift the 2 dot from the 1 to the 2 to represent their personal changes. Or they can shift a dot of one background for another background, since they all cost the same. Expect that that's where most of the changes will happen, is in the backgrounds, because usually that's the most volatile part of a character sheet. Backgrounds are lost and gained, and as vampires age, it is one of the most necessary parts for them to gain. I guess that's pretty much all I have for the mechanical side of things. If you have any more questions, please feel free to ask them. I can get to them on my next discussion, which will be after session 2, which will be going up a week from today. So, yeah, whatever the Monday following the one this one goes up on. I'm not one for keeping track of dates half the time. But in any case, yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this little discussion. I hope that you're enjoying the game, and stay with us. We love having you. So until next time, stay hungry.